Chair Snyder, we are live and you may begin the meeting when you're ready. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mackenzie. Good morning, everyone. I call to order the January 13, 2021 meeting of the Transportation Technology Committee of the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. I want to spend just a minute to welcome all the members of the committee. A lot, to say the least, has happened since last we met. But our challenges in the region continue to evolve, if you will, and we continue to believe that technology can play a critical role in addressing those challenges, whatever they are. I want to especially note that Mayor Rischel is here, and she's the co-chair. And I also want to welcome all the members of the public who are viewing us now and in the future. Again, the role of technology is something that we certainly don't need to emphasize any more than we've seen over the past year, but we do realize that it can play a critical role in resolving our transportation challenges, both old and new. So the first action item for the meeting is a resolution finding need to conduct meeting electronically. Now that resolution is there provided to you, and I'll verbally summarize the situation as follows. As a result of the COVID-19 and Governor Northam's declaration of a state of emergency, the authority's Transportation Technology Committee meeting is being held electronically. With the recent passage of the amendments to House Bill 29, the FOIA bill, which allows regional bodies such as the authority and their committees to conduct business meetings electronically, this morning's business meeting is being held remotely. Doing so will enable us to keep safety as a top priority, ensuring that we're adhering to social distancing requirements. Meeting by electronic means is authorized because the items on the January 13th, 2021 committee meeting agenda are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the authority. If there are any questions, please let me know. Thank you. I'd entertain a motion for approval of the resolution, which is part of the materials which you should all receive. That is the longer resolution.
So moved, Chair Snyder.
Thank you, Mayor Rischel. Is there a second? Anyone? Thank you. Who is that? I'm sorry.
I think that was Mr. Mudge.
Yes, Mr. Mudge seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. The resolution has been approved and will proceed with the electronic meeting accordingly. The next item is approval of the meeting minutes. Keith, yeah, those notes I think have been made available to everyone. Does anyone have any comments about the notes from our prior meeting?
Chair Snyder, I will be abstaining since I was not in attendance from the abstaining from the vote.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? All right, entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes of December 4th, 2019. Anyone, please? Thank you, Mr. Mudge. Moved. Is there a second? Second, Mayor Rischel. Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? One, Mayor Rischel. Any other abstentions? Thank you very much. So let's move now to the real meat of the agenda, which is a discussion of where we are right now based upon some great input from members of the committee, as well as what we've heard from the public. So, Keith Jasper, you're the star of the show right now. So please take it away from here.
Thank you, Chair Snyder, and good morning, members of the committee. It's been a long time. That last meeting was in December of 2019, and it's taken us a bit longer to get to this point. We were so close to releasing a first draft in early April of 2020. Some of you may recall we mentioned this at the 2020 version of our annual roundtable in mid-March, and I think for many of us that was the last in-person gathering of any note. So we obviously had to quickly retool ourselves basically for virtual meetings, and the window of opportunity that we had back in 2020 came and went, unfortunately, but we're now back, and I would say indeed the pandemic has taught us a number of lessons already with respect to transportation, and particularly the nature of work from home, and how businesses and employees have risen to that challenge, and these things are, as a minimum, tangentially relevant to the strategic plan, if not directly relevant. But I got a short presentation, which was the presentation included in the draft materials that we sent out back in, I think, early to mid-December. So I'm just going to quickly go over this to set some context, and then get to the discussion in just a moment. So if you could just click through the slides for me, Mackenzie. Just keep going. So just to kind of restate here, that this presentation, this document is really looking to kind of give you a high-level overview of the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan, which is the real goal here. This is the end game that we're looking at in the short to medium term for the committee. So we identified, based on previous inputs and advice from the committee, 8 strategies within the overarching Transportation Technology Strategic Plan that we felt best represented the inputs from the committee, where we can look to leverage transportation technologies in support of MBTA's vision and goals for regional transportation system in Northern Virginia. So right from the very beginning, this committee has said to us that we need to be needs driven, and look to see how technologies can help or even hinder the needs that have been identified. And for this purpose throughout, we have used the vision and goals from MBTA's transaction, which is our long-range transportation plan for Northern Virginia. So come back to that in just a moment. But I also want to mention that credit to the committee for kind of helping us to clarify our own thinking on how we deal with topics such as safety, equity, and sustainability. Early on, we thought about strategies for each of these 3 subjects, but in the end, what we thought was the correct approach was to refer to these as core values. And as such, everything that we do has to be mindful of safety, equity, and sustainability. And in the future, there may be other core values that we might want to ask. So if you've had a chance to review the material that we've sent, we have a brief discussion on how each of the 8 strategies relates to safety, equity, and sustainability. But we certainly feel these are wraparound core values that needs to be applied to everything, not just standalone things for individual strategies. And then critically in all of this, we don't want to reinvent any wheels, and we don't want to do anything which doesn't have a clear purpose. And for us, the clear purpose is to understand what roles MBTA has. And I say MBTA in its broadest sense, meaning both the authority, the body itself, MBTA staff, and various hybrids of MBTA staff working with other staff, MBTA working with other governmental entities and stakeholders and so on. So we have, during the course of this work, identified 9 possible roles that MBTA could play, and these vary among the 8 strategies that we identified. So next slide, please, Mackenzie. The next few pages in here, I won't go over these in any detail, but these actually are a kind of generic Q&A that Chair Snyder helped us put together to kind of serve as a general context for what we're trying to accomplish here, so that anyone who's kind of fresh to this process can start with these FAQs and get an understanding of why we're doing this. So you already have this presentation. We will post it after this meeting if you want to refer back to it, and I'm happy to discuss any of these things now. But I'm going to skip through these in the interest of time. I'm happy to come back to them if anyone would like to. And so I wanted to get to this slide here, which is an outline. We call it a proposed structure here. We've actually, since this slide was put together back in December and shared with you with the materials back then, we've actually now taken the next step to actually start putting this document together. So the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan is going to encompass all the materials that we've sent to you previously, obviously adjusted for your feedback. But it also will add a lot of the contextual information that someone who was picking this up from a complete beginner standpoint could actually see the whole reason why we're doing this and how we're doing this as well. But we spared you that content because you'd already been through that process with us, and we focused on the actual, I guess, red meat of the strategic plan. So the one thing that let me just back up. We sent you a draft of this document yesterday, obviously with no intention of you reviewing it before today's meeting. We want you to have it so that if you get a chance, you can look at this over the next couple of weeks and provide us feedback by the end of the month. The one thing that's missing from this current draft of note is towards the end, you'll see an action plan. The strategic plan is part of the approach here, but without the action plan that goes with it, in all likelihood, nothing much is going to happen, with the strategic plan. So it needs to have some impact, and that impact in this case is going to be through an action plan, and that action plan will look at more specifically, how those strategies will actually be implemented. It'll consider schedule, it'll consider who is responsible, and a general process, and some sort of approach to measuring whether or not we've accomplished the action plan, by extension, the strategic plan. So that's coming later. We're working on the action plan. We'll be working on it over the next couple of weeks. We really don't want to solidify the action plan until we and the committee have reached a comfort level that the strategic plan is about right and heading in the right direction. If there's any major deviations we have to make, we want to address those first before we worry about an action plan. Next slide, please. I think we can probably skip over this one, Mackenzie. And I'll just pause here for each strategy, and you see the strategies listed from 1 through 8. I mentioned the MBTA roles, and so we put a check mark in for each role for each strategy as we interpret that. So you see that the roles vary from funding, policy, advocate, which are primarily authority roles. The next 3 are champion, facilitate, stakeholder, which we would consider these to be shared roles. And then the final 3 staff roles will be planning, outreach, education, and observer. Observer is important. We probably will observe everything in reality, but there are some strategies where our role may not be much stronger than observer, simply in recognition of the fact that we don't have the the stature, the resources to actually be anything other than observer, but we need to observe in order to be able to react. There are a lot of check marks in the planning column, and I just want to mention in passing that when we refer to planning, we are usually referring to our long-range transportation plan, which we call transaction. Transaction is a plan that the authority has a statutory responsibility to prepare and maintain and update, and we do this on a 5-year cycle. The current cycle for transaction actually started about a year ago with a listening session, actually almost exactly a year ago, with a listening session that the authority held at its January meeting, and we are increasingly ramping up that process to through a procurement to bring a consultant on board, and when that has occurred, then the real work at the sharp end will go forward at full speed, and so the timing of this strategic plan is really important, because we're looking to reach hopefully authority approval of the strategic plan in some form by spring of this year, and then it will immediately become available to our consultant team to incorporate as appropriate into the update of transaction. Wherever we've got a planning check mark, that's something where there's going to be an interaction with transaction of some level. I'd also just mention in passing that when it comes to advocates, anything that comes from that may eventually end up in a future legislative agenda or program that the authority maintains and updates annually in readiness for the annual General Assembly session. So the 2021 legislative program is well advanced, and so anything that comes out of the strategic plan would flow into the next legislative update by the authority, if appropriate. So that's
Snyder, do you want
yes.
questions now, or do you want to reserve questions to the end?
By all means, ask questions now.
Okay. So can you just quickly review the significance of being in transaction or not being in transaction? And so I think the point that I want to drive home is this is not just a planning exercise that's important, but that there is real money behind the projects, and that the projects have to meet various legal elements, as well as being in transaction. So Keith, could you quickly just review for people why what we're doing here is not just an academic or theoretical exercise?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the most immediate impact related to transaction and planning is that the authority cannot fund any projects that are not included in the current version of its long-range plan. So the current plan was adopted by the authority in October of 2017. And since that time, the 352 projects that are in the project list associated with that iteration of the plan are the ones that are eligible for funding by the authority. And you'll note funding is the first column listed here for authority, excuse me, for MBTA roles. So there is a direct linkage between our long-range plan, which is looking out 20, 25 years, and our funding programs, which we refer to as our 6-year program, which are updated every 2 years. So that I would say is the first thing. But Chestnut, you're correct. It's we don't see this as an academic exercise, and so, for example, during the summer and fall of 2020. We proposed and the authority agreed to set aside a small amount of money to enable us to do some planning work to understand what the transportation impacts were of the pandemic and how that might affect our approach to long-range planning. So that work was actually very insightful. I'm not sure we've got any definitive answers, but we certainly know how sensitive some assumptions might be in terms of long-range forecasts, and that in turn will affect our evaluation of projects. And I'm noting particularly here things related to work from home, travel demand management, as well as, to the extent that the authority can, identifying and addressing the serious issues that have hit transit agencies from a financial perspective when riders disappear. So that work, which was done in the summer and fall of last year, will be revisited and probably amplified in the next iteration of transaction as well. So, there's at least a couple of ways in which this strategic plan is going to flow into our thinking about long-range planning, and long-range planning is definitely always going to affect our approach to funding.
And one other question, can you give the folks a rough idea of the level of funding?
To date, the authority has allocated 10 fiscal years of revenue. Now, some of those revenue years are in the future, so we don't have the money yet. But because we allocate through a 6-year program, we have actually allocated 10 years worth of revenue. And if memory serves me correctly, that's $2.5 billion worth of revenue that's been allocated through our transaction and specifically through our 6-year program. There's approximately another $1 billion, I would guess, of revenue over that same time period that the authority will allocate to our 9-member jurisdictions for transportation purposes, but the authority does not have a say in how that money is allocated, providing it's allocated within the law, which basically says it must be used for transportation purposes of some sort. So that money is also going to be allocated over the same time period, but at the discretion of the jurisdictions.
So Keith, we got a question in chat about timing of the long-range transportation plan update process. Have you just summarized that?
Our goal at the present time is that the next update to transaction will be adopted by November of 2022. That's the target. Obviously, that's still close to 2 years into the future, so we may need to adjust that along the way, but that is the goal. Okay,
and I also got a question about who's the champion or owner of the effort that we're about. I think we're a committee of NVTA, and NVTA is the owner of the work. Is that right?
Close. Strictly speaking, the committee is an advisory committee to the executive director.
Right.
And the executive director is the one who's taken the advice from the committee and applying it as appropriate. I don't want to go too into the weeds here, but the authority has 2 statutory committees, a technical advisory committee, which is comprised of citizen transportation experts, and a planning coordination advisory committee, which is comprised of local elected officials representing each of our 4 counties, 5 cities, and 5 largest towns in Northern Virginia. Those 2 committees are, essentially report directly to the authority. That's through by law, basically. But they do have an oversight responsibility for both transaction, our long-range planning, and for our 6-year programming efforts. And for those 2 statutory committees, we want them to become engaged in this process. But we very much see this committee reporting to Monica as the champion for this, and you know, just kind of to go back to 2017 when the authority adopted the current iteration of transaction, there were a number of recommendations in there related to transportation technology. There was some quite detailed analysis related to transportation technology, and it was apparent to Monica, you know, fairly shortly after that, if not before, that the authority had to be much more proactive in its approach to transportation technology, both in terms of harnessing the good and mitigating the bad. And that really is the genesis of this committee and the strategic plan.
Mr. Snyder, if I could add on, this is Monica. One of the reasons why it was important to have a diverse representation on the committee, and of course, to have some authority members on the committee, because again, as staff, even though this is a committee of the executive director, when we look to implementation and what the region will embrace, I will look to the authority for that. And then to go a little further, as Keith shared, when we vet this with the committees, because we definitely want buy-in, not only on the committee level under the authorities committees, but we hope that everyone will take this back to their own member localities or agencies to share the work we're doing. So this is why you see a diverse representation on this committee. We're not doing this in a vacuum so that everyone can be aware. And we do have the Commonwealth representatives and things of that nature so that we can get buy-in. Because if you look at this chart, there are some things that the authority can do, but there's also some things that we cannot do. So we're hoping to get some buy-in.
Okay, thanks very much. I think the bottom line of all this is that it's important work and that it will influence things moving forward. So thank you for that. Keith, any other questions right now? There'll be lots of opportunities for questions as soon as Keith is done. Keith, you want to move forward then?
Sure. I think I'll go to the next slide, Mackenzie. I'm not going to dwell on this one, but for each of the 8 strategies, we've listed technology groups and try to assess the extent to which each strategy will be relevant to each group of technologies. We can probably kick these around quite a lot over time, and happy to do so, but that's probably way too in the weeds for this conversation right now, but happy to take feedback on that. This is all included in the materials that have been sent previously. Next slide, Mackenzie. So in terms of the documents that were previously shared, I've mentioned the core values, the potential MBTA roles, and the 8 strategies, and we have received some great feedback so far from members of the committee. We've also shared this with another committee, what we call the RJAC, which is our Regional Jurisdiction and Agency Coordinating Committee. This is essentially a committee of staff between MBTA and member jurisdictions and other regional partners and state partners. So at the staff level, we've also reached out to the RJAC now. They've been interested in this initiative, but they've not really been involved in it. And we felt that it was important to bring the RJAC membership up to speed on this. So they've seen the same materials, and they also have provided some feedback to us, which we're absorbing at the moment. But this is all part of the same pattern where we're trying to move forward from what the committee has helped us to accomplish so far to kind of working through our institutional process, as it were, to kind of get a broad range of feedback from other players in our process. So we're very pleased with the input we've received. We're very open-minded. We've never developed anything like this before. We don't want to rush it, but there is a schedule we'd like to try and maintain, which potentially could include bringing this to the authority for discussion and approval in April of this year. But if that's too soon, then we're not going to push it until we've reached a high degree of comfort from all parties. So we're very much open to feedback. We're not wedded to just the 8 strategies that we've shared. But these were the ones we felt through previous discussions rose to the top. But there's certainly room to add. There's even more certainly room to modify or refocus or re-emphasize any of the strategies if that is the wish of the committee. We haven't incorporated comments so far. Mackenzie, is there one more slide? Okay, the next step. So you've got the draft of the current draft of the full document, which does include the draft content previously shared and some of the comments. We're still thinking through some of the comments that you've made, so we may not have necessarily addressed them all yet. Mostly we wanted to add the contextual information. So at this stage, there's no substantive changes in the document we shared yesterday with that information that we shared in December. And we're looking to kind of update this document, based on any further comments that you may have between now and Wednesday, 27th of January. And the reason for that is we move into committee cycles in February, and we'd like to take the updated version of this document as a draft to the 2 committees I mentioned, Technical Advisory Committee and Planning Coordination Advisory Committee, as well as to our Planning and Programming Committee, which is comprised of 5 authority members, and which tends to serve as like the final filter on all the comments that the committees generate, so that when we go to the authority, we've kind of harmonized all the comments and we go with a single voice with a recommendation. So that committee will also be receiving this information during February, and obviously we'll continue to engage with our staff committee, the RJAC, along the way as well. So that's kind of the process where we are from here. Looking a little bit beyond that, I mentioned the transaction update earlier. There'll be a lot of technical work which is done in the remainder of this year and the early part of next year. So we will want to, if you're willing to keep the committee engaged in that process, providing guidance, reviewing findings, etc., and helping us to understand where we need to, make mid-course corrections to the strategy if appropriate. So I do hope we will be able to keep the committee engaged. We won't be intense in meeting schedule, as it were, but there will be a need to keep you engaged. So that's kind of like where we are. If you'd like, I can get Mackenzie to go over some of the comments and the way we've addressed them. I also understand that Dr. Mudge has some suggestions on a possible additional strategy as well. So I'll defer to you, Chair Snyder, as to how you want to handle the conversation.
Well, sure. Before we do any more discussion, does anybody have any initial questions at this point that they'd like to raise on what they've heard? And Monica, did you have any additional comments you wanted to make at this point? I just want to say that a large part of the NVTA's success so far is as a result of Monica. So Monica, please. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. And I would say even more so, it's the staff. We have a great team, but we just want to get input from the committee as to your thoughts on where we are on this draft plan, because as Keith noted, we would like to bring forward this proposed plan to the authority in the spring, because there is a timing consideration as we update transaction. Now, noting that we are in the early stages of the update of transaction, but we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to include the outputs of this plan in the transaction update. So having said that, we would look forward to hearing from the committee. Thank you, Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Monica. So, if there's nothing right now, why don't we go to Mackenzie, and then Keith, and then Dr. Mudge for some substantive comment. And this is where we move from, okay, this is the outline of what we're doing, why we're doing it, the significance of what we're doing, to more of a substantive discussion. So, Mackenzie?
Thank you, Chair Snyder. If I may, I think there is a question in the chat from Mr. McAndrew about one of the strategies. We might be able to touch on that as I move through the comments as well, or I could go ahead and toss it back to you to address that question.
Why don't you go ahead and address the question?
Okay. First, I will read it aloud and then respond to it. So the question was, from the transportation side of the cybersecurity/privacy strategy, which agency or actor is the champion or owner of this effort, and how do we make sure it doesn't fall through the cracks? State creates policy and state and locals implement in coordinated fashion. So we've addressed part of that in regards to who's the champion of the effort. But I think part of the part that may not have been addressed was how do we make sure it doesn't fall through the cracks? And I think that is something we'll cover in the timeframes that are associated with each of the strategies. And I can point to that as we walk through parts of the document, looking at some of the input that's been received thus far. And that's part of where the observer role comes in as well, as making sure we're aware of what's happening in the sector, in local entities, and adjusting our plans as we go along. So that's something we'll touch on in the action plan as it's developed as well. So Joe, if you could please let me know if I didn't touch on anything there, but I think that covers the comment, and I'll move on to some of the other feedback we've received here too, if that's okay with the chair.
Sure, go ahead.
Great. Oh, and Joe said, great, that touches everything. So I think we're doubly ready. Bear with me for one moment while I pull up the correct document, please, everyone. Great. Okay. So I have pulled up here the full draft that we shared with you all yesterday. And I'm not going to walk through every component of it because, as we mentioned earlier, most of the core content had already been shared. And you'll have the opportunity to review this more in depth over the coming 2 weeks and send us any additional feedback that you deem appropriate. Just wanted to give you a quick overview of what we're doing to make sure that we address your comments and your very valuable and very thoughtful feedback as we go through this process, this iterative process. So you'll see in the document, of course, there is a table of contents as there was in the first set of materials that we've sent, but it's expanded significantly. And we've also added a few more contextual items like a list of tables, and all of these should be hyperlinked so you can click through it easily. And we've added a list of acronyms as the first substantive item you'll come to. This was something we're intending to add, but it was really supported by the feedback that we received in the first round of materials, which asked several different times about acronyms used in the sidebars of the strategy. There is a sidebar that gives an idea of potential technologies that each strategy may impact. And in several instances, we use acronyms there because those were meant to be quick reference tools. We can certainly expand those to have the full terms if desired, but we also added this list of acronyms for easy access, and it defines everything that is referenced in the plan and a few additional items as well in the case that a reader clicks through any of the citations in the plan and finds an acronym used in one of those sources. So moving forward, I should note if you have any questions or feedback about anything I'm showing you, please feel free to interject. Otherwise, throughout the plan, as you review the new materials we sent you, you'll see these small comments over to the side. If you don't see them, you can navigate to the top of your Word program and go to the Review tab and click View Comments. And I'm also happy to help with any technical issues that involve in your review process as well. But you should see these little comments here. And basically, I've taken any feedback that we've received either through the survey that we sent out to the committee, through email from the TTC members or the RJAC members, as Keith mentioned, or from any one-on-one briefings that we gave to members of the TTC or the RJAC, and put them in these comments. And you can see it clearly called out with this feedback from where it is derived. And then after any of the feedback, the comment will also explain what was done to address it if the feedback has already been incorporated. If no explicit mention of how the comment was addressed is mentioned, that means we're still working on it, but we still really valued it and wanted to make sure you could see how we're working through this review process. This one is a fairly small piece of feedback, so I'll go ahead and show you something with a bit more substance to it so you can see what I mean there. Bear with me for one moment, please. Great, so here's an example of something that we added to the core values. We received this comment here, which I won't go through specifically, but you can see that the feedback was addressed by adding the highlighted text here. In other cases, you can tell that we've suggested removing text, and it's usually highlighted in red with a strike through, and then replacing it with new text, which is typically colored in green. Try to make it as clear as possible what the feedback was and how we incorporated it, and we welcome any feedback on that process as well. There was a lot of really good feedback, so it's hard to encapsulate it all, but thank you everyone. And the feedback ranged from comments on the core values to comments on the roles for the authority, staff, and combined, and on the strategies themselves. Some of them were addressed as we added the additional contextual information, but we also see the need for a few more introductory paragraphs in some places, like, for example, around the core goals. And I'll scroll back up to that. So you'll see this placeholder here that was a result of feedback received thus far, and we will be expanding on those items as we come to the next round. So is there any specific topics that anyone on the committee would like to address verbally now? Or Keith, anything in particular that you want to come to? We had, again, so much great feedback. I don't want to run through it all individually, but please rest assured that we're integrating it all to the best of our abilities. Otherwise, I'd be happy to move on to Mr. Mudge to talk about his suggestion for an additional strategy to the plan.
Chair Snyder.
A question from Mayor Rischel, who asked about the privacy statement, their legal overtones. And so I think what she's suggesting is that we make that more of a focus, perhaps for additional language. Mayor Rischel, do you want to elaborate on that question?
Had to find my mute button. I
thought
think
I would be the first, by the way.
when I read that, being concerned about privacy should be fundamental. When I read the verbiage that was in the document, it was more of a feel-good wording, and I understand the need to not have the MBTA or this committee overstep. But I also feel there's a need to acknowledge that, and we don't have to call this out specifically, this is just an example, that the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution accords everyone the right to privacy. So I do see legal issues here, and I think we need to strengthen that area. However, we could come to a meeting of the minds on language that could be incorporated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, the issue of privacy is clearly a significant one, and will probably be gaining in its importance. So maybe that's something we can talk to council for the authority about the best way to address those issues. So great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there others who want to make verbal comments at this point, or send them through the chat function? Okay, Mackenzie and Keith, should we turn it over to Dr. Mudge for his comment? Is that?
Chestnut, I just have one thing before we do that. On the core values, safety, equity, sustainability, it would be remiss of me to not say that these core values are essentially embedded into our approach for transaction and specifically called out in the recently approved vision statement that the authority took action on in December. And so when we get comments that are related to the core values, I think we want to be sure that we stay consistent between the strategic plan and transaction. And since transaction is one of the authority's two primary responsibilities, with the 6-year program being the other, probably we'll address comments related to core values at the transaction level and just make sure they flow down to the strategic plan. But we certainly will want to have the consistency between the two documents.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Mudge, I think we'd be interested in hearing your comments. Thank you.
I will attempt to be brief, although I have to admit it's very spooky being called doctor. It doesn't happen very often, and I will try not to use too many long words. My biggest concern, there's a lot of things I like in the report. I think it could have said more about autonomous vehicles. The key characteristic of autonomous vehicles is that they've been overpromised, so it's not hard to ignore them a little bit. It's also important to remember they have multiple dimensions to them. There's like local freight delivery, which you have right now with Nuria and others. There's a lot of stuff happening in the transit world. Automated buses are being deployed several places. I'm involved in some of those projects. Medium speed shuttles are coming. Zoox, which is owned by Amazon, has a vehicle that they'll start to deploy by the end of this year. Cruise, owned by General Motors, is doing the same thing, and that's a lot more practical than the cute little low-speed shuttles we have. Intercity freight has been talked about, but it looks like it's going to start to be deployed late this year or next year. You've got Waymo, which has been operating fully autonomous vehicles in Phoenix, and they seem to be very serious about moving those to other cities soon. So you can see in the next 4 or 5 years, some of the stuff we've been talking about may actually happen. If you look at the impact of this stuff, it has, in economic jargon, are called non-linear impacts. That means they change an awful lot of stuff. Most of that is positive in terms of access to jobs, in terms of congestion. But it is a chicken and egg issue. How do you get it started? And you end up having it start in certain places like Phoenix or other places before here. What's happening in a couple of places where I think this is a potential model for Northern Virginia is you have, for example, in Michigan, there's a program partly funded by the state, but a lot of private money in it, which is going to stimulate the growth of autonomous vehicles. They're picking a couple of corridors, and they're going to deploy cars, trucks, buses, everything along that corridor. They'll have a corridor that'll only be for autonomous vehicles, with the idea that will stimulate the economic activity and more development. And I think it's something worthwhile thinking about. I'd hate to have all these new things happen someplace else. But if you think about one option might be, are there things that can be done to stimulate development? And that could be either similar to what they're doing in Michigan. There are projects also starting in Puget Sound and a few other places to stimulate development. Some of it could be done around transit as well. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. So I was just going to suggest there should be another, I don't know, there should be another strategy That would be to stimulate growth in autonomous vehicles. Again, using the Michigan example as a model. And again, I recognize, everybody's heard this stuff for such a long time. There's the early developers of this that have been even admitted they were wrong. But that doesn't mean it's never going to happen. And you start to see we're getting very close. So 5 or 10 years from now, it'll definitely be here.
So let me just make a comment on the comment, and I invite others to participate either on the chat function or please just unmute yourselves. So it seems to me the issue might be understood in our context is not whether this is going to happen, but how it links to our core values. In other words, if we were to implement this in our region, participate either through non-action or preferably through action, funding or regulatory or otherwise, how do we implement autonomous vehicles in this region consistent with the 3 core values of safety, equity, and sustainability? So, for example, I think the safety issue was pointed out by a couple fatalities, which at least in the public's mind led to a slowing down of the technology. Let's go back, let's make sure we're really accounting for these surprisingly complex driving environments that we all sort of grew up with and have sort of internalized, but it turns out aren't that all that easy to program. And then equity and sustainability. How do we link what you're saying to those 3 core values?
I'll give my opinion on this stuff. The safety is real, and that's already happening. They're already, most new cars that people buy today already have automatic braking in them, lane tracking in it. Those are things which are going to increase safety in general. Fully autonomous vehicles will do that as well, but I think that's the safety aspect of them has been overrated. I think the technology we need for safer vehicles is going to be there anyway. I think the equity and the sustainability part is very important. This stuff improves access to labor, access to jobs, because it reduces the cost of travel. It makes it easier for people who may not own a car to have one to travel. I think there are very important economic aspects around that. And I guess I think there are sort of 2 things that we can do. One is let the market, let the value, whatever the private firms want to do happen, because it is going to happen in some way. Or are there ways for the region to help control some of that? And I think in a sense that's what Michigan may be trying to do, where they are going to develop their own autonomous vehicle corridor. They're going to define what goes into it, and therefore define what types of vehicles happen first. So I can see there's some value there for the region to define exactly what types of vehicles happen, where do they happen, how do they happen, and that in a sense that is saying let's try to shape the market, because again there are big companies involved in this. They're all going to be wanting to come to this region, and are there ways for NVTA and others to help shape the way that happens?
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to comment on this topic? Either through the chat function. All right, I did get one. Marisha was making a point that the kinds of technology that we're seeing more and more in cars are still ultimately the human being in control. So, it's an evolutionary thing as more and more of these things come in, like lane alerts and automatic stopping and all those other things. So I think one thing we've seen is from the last few years is we're not leaping to widespread autonomous vehicles immediately, and there have been the inclusion of increasingly sophisticated safety technology, which I think has been beneficial. But I think Dr. Mudge, I think what you're saying is autonomous vehicles are coming, and we better address that through this process and otherwise. So thanks for that. Mayor Rishel, did you want to elaborate on your point?
No, basically that's it, Chair Snyder. Thank you.
Okay, good. Other people, other comments on this particular topic, just thoughts that occur to you now. And again, the critical thing is after this meeting where we're kind of laying things out, bringing everybody back up to where we are today, that there'll be lots of opportunities to make additional comments. Anything else on that particular topic of autonomous vehicles?
Hi, this is Kathy McGee. If I could just briefly make a comment. I definitely agree with Dick and the fact that we're undoubtedly going to see more autonomy coming into our transportation system. I can tell you that VDOT is working very hard to understand what that means from the infrastructure perspective, what we need to do to be as supportive as possible as these vehicles enter the network. I do also agree with Dick that it's likely to come first to some sort of dedicated lane use because of the complexity of the safety that so many folks have already mentioned. It's not a simple thing to train a vehicle to make all the decisions that drivers do second by second as they navigate the network. We've done lots of research. We have active test beds in Northern Virginia, by the way, where we're continuing to do that research. We have a great partnership with Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. And I think it's worth pointing out that they just cut the ribbon on an expansion of the Smart Road to do more rural testing. People forget that Northern Virginia includes both very, very urban stretches of roadway and very rural. And some of those roadways are the most complex situations and environments for both human drivers and automated vehicles. So I think there's still work to be done before we see an automated vehicle going anywhere and everywhere. But there will be limited deployments of these vehicles as they come into the network. And we do need to be prepared for that. But I'm not convinced that we know what that means yet fully. And so I would encourage all of us to continue to have this conversation and to work through these issues. Thank you.
So, Kathy, if you could maybe define smart road for us. What does that really mean?
Sure. I'm sorry. So the Virginia Smart Road is the test track located at the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute primarily. That is a closed test track. So it affords us the opportunity to test this technology under a variety of situations, including all kinds of weather and lighting conditions, to see how the systems react under those situations and in those environments. But more recently, the smart roads were actually expanded to include some live roadways in Northern Virginia. So we have a portion of I-66, Route 29, Route 50, and Gallows Road that completes that circuit back to I-66, where we deployed roadside units that allow communication between the infrastructure and the vehicles. That's sort of up in the air at the moment because of some recent FCC actions, but be that as it may, we do have or have had over the last 10 years a number of research initiatives underway to understand how those communications work, what benefits we can achieve by having that connectivity between vehicles and the infrastructure, and more recently, how automation will impact our system. VTTI got a large federal grant recently to actually dig deeper into how automated vehicles will interact with emergency services, which is really, really important from both a safety and a mobility perspective. So we're looking forward to the results of that research as well. I'd be happy to keep the committee updated on those activities as they go along.
No, that would be great. I'd appreciate any questions on this right now, but I'm just trying to figure out what are the functionalities that we fit under the safe road. Is it theoretically a situation where the road would help? Well, it's not car to car. I mean, theoretically, I've seen presentations where the car to car communication means that if the car, like 10 cars up, slows down, that somehow communicates with the other cars. Tell me what the functionality is ultimately of the safe road with regard to either congestion or safety. So would the smart road sort of control the speeds of the cars at that point to get maximum use of the roadway? I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out. Kathy, what?
No, that's great. And I would love to continue. I hate to take everyone else's time. I could talk about this all day. So there are different perspectives on that. From my perspective, as someone who spent my whole career with a state DOT, that's exactly what I would like to see, that vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure communication that provides overall situational awareness beyond what individual vehicle sensors can detect. So if there is something going on in the roadway beyond the sensor line of sight, that could be communicated through this connectivity to give a higher level of safety and mobility. We talk about speed harmonization or variable speed limits to smooth the flow. We've had obviously very different levels of success with that as people ignore our requests for changes in speed. If you can go directly into the vehicle, it works a lot better, but you have to have acceptance of that. And so we're working through all of those issues as we look at what the technology will allow and what we can negotiate with vehicle manufacturers in terms of messages into the vehicle.
Let me say, I think most of the private firms in the business are not waiting for that connectivity to happen. They're not waiting for the V2I and V2V that Kathy talked about. They're going to assume their vehicle will operate independently of any big system. So they're not waiting for that to be deployed.
I disagree with that, but I also will hold tight to my belief that safety and mobility is greatly enhanced through that connectivity.
I would not disagree, but I don't think I think the market's going to move, and that's where there are things that an aggressive or thoughtful public sector could maybe help improve how it's being deployed, and I've seen very, very few, if any, either state DOTs or regional groups trying to do that. That's why I'm impressed with what Michigan's doing. That may not be the right model, but they are trying to shape how that market develops. And I don't want to say we should copy what Michigan's doing, but there may be other ways in which the region could shape how the market develops. And I think it's going to happen, and I hate to see it. As a card-carrying economist, I'm happy to see the market develop, but there are still ways in which the public sector can shape how that happens. And now is not too early to think about that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for an excellent discussion, and we'll see how to embed this discussion in our documents for sure. Thank you for that. I had a note from Monica about liability insurance concerns for transit providers. I think the world of transit insurance is a pretty specialized world, and I think if that is an issue that people want to follow up on, I think we can go to one or more of our transit providers, and either they're self-insured or they're probably working through a specialized insurance company, and maybe we can address liability issues if that seems like something people want to follow up on. But the notion of autonomous vehicles is, and I can speak from my day job, insurance companies are well aware of the developments of autonomous vehicles, certainly private passenger vehicles, and I assume they are as well. So anyway, perhaps that's something we can follow up on as well. Other questions, comments, either in the chat function or anyone, please unmute yourselves and feel free to throw a question or comment out now.
Chair Snyder. Chair Snyder.
Yes.
I have a concern. I think that we should acknowledge that there is a chance that we all as consumers may end up being buffeted about on an ocean of uncertainty. And I say that because of my comment in the chat about Congress giving potentially immunity from liability to AV makers, as they have done vaccine producers. I think we all know that money talks. We know that there are enormous pressures on members of Congress, enormous amounts of lobbying take place. There's big pharma, big banks. We could be looking at a situation where there's big AV 10, 15, 20 years down the line. And I just want to go on record as saying I'm concerned about that. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much. Well, I think that underscores the importance of our careful approach to this and assuring that to the extent that we can, that the market serves our core functions and does it well. So thanks. Good point. And that'll certainly be something we'll take some more look at for sure. Are there other questions or comments at this point? Okay, Mackenzie, Keith, other things you'd like to discuss right now?
From my perspective, I think I'd just like to kind of react to the conversation regarding Dick's suggestion in particular, but I think this approach will extend to the comment that Mayor Rochelle just made as well, that we certainly would like to take a look at this and try and shape what a potential additional strategy might look like. You know, recognizing that VDOT through Kathy and Virginia Tech and others are already doing so much at kind of like the operational technical safety level that it doesn't make any sense to me, at least right now, what role MBTA will play in that specifically. But I guess coming back to Dick's point, he's looking more at the user end and the regional economy end of the technology, and so there may be some area there where we can look at a possible role of the authority facilitating or encouraging something to happen that would, we would kind of agree would be to the benefit of Northern Virginians in general, Northern Virginia businesses, Northern Virginia economy. So I think it's kind of in that area that I'd like to look. And if we do not already note the smart corridor, and I think it was called the Virginia Connected Corridor as well, at some point, Kathy, if we did not already note that in this document, then we should. I think Mackenzie's got to turn to a page where we do note it, which is great. So, I think it's important, as I mentioned earlier, that we don't attempt to reinvent any wheels. We know that WMATA and MBTC are doing a lot of work in the fair payment technology area, and so it doesn't make sense for MBTA to develop a strategy to do that when it's already in a mature status. So I kind of feel the same way about the smart road. It's mature. It's not something that MBTA can really add much to. But in terms of market impact, there may be a vacuum there. for the region to consider. So what I'm saying is we'll come up with we'll work with Dick and with Kathy to try and come up with what a potential ninth strategy might look like, and share that probably with you just kind of on a freestanding basis, together with anything else that kind of seems to match that kind of approach. So I think my kind of closing request to the committee, if not now, over the next few days or weeks, would be to consider not so much what's in the draft, but maybe what's not in the draft that should be in the draft in terms of potential new strategies or other things that we should be taking account of that we appear to have overlooked. Because, like I said earlier, we've not done this before. We don't really have a standing operating procedure that we can turn to on this. We're just trying to use good judgment and diligence, but it's easy to focus on trying to stop something happening, but encouraging something to happen may be something we've overlooked. So I'd be happy for any thoughts, either now or over the next couple of weeks on that topic in particular.
It just seems to me that what we ought to do is look at, as we will everything, how can we support the development and improvement, but in the context of the three core values. And this may be a great example about how to do that.
Right.
It's not whether, maybe it's how. So anyway, just any additional thoughts or comments? Thank you. Great discussion. Rachel, thanks for your questions and comments. And we'll be thinking more about the whole liability issue as well. Anything else that anyone wants to present or comment on this morning? And again, lots of opportunities for comment in writing, but a fairly short and aggressive time frame. And next steps, as was noted, feedback hopefully by Wednesday, January 27. These aren't absolutely hard deadlines, but they're what will enable us to keep the progress going. And then the next meeting we're thinking about is February 10th. So you see, we're now building on what we've done before. We understand from the discussion about the procedure that this does fit into a bigger, important picture. I think it would be great to pursue along the lines that we've talked about. Mackenzie or Keith, anything else on agenda item number 4? And all the members, thanks again for a good discussion, not only about the particular issues we're dealing with, but an example of how we link various technologies to our core values. Thank you. Keith and Mackenzie, then move on to member updates. I know we've taken a lot of folks' time this morning. Are there any member updates that people wish to share? Okay, not hearing any. Monica, Keith, Mackenzie, anything on agenda item number 6?
Mr. Snyder, I think we've discussed the update of transaction. That was the only thing that I had to add. We will, of course, keep this committee abreast of where we are in regards to schedule in that process.
Okay. One thing I'd like to mention is the 6th annual Northern Virginia Transportation Roundtable. We're still working on the details, but if you could save the date for Wednesday, March 10th in the morning, that is what we're targeting. It will be a virtual roundtable this year, and I'm hopeful we will not be charging a registration fee, but we will be capacity constrained for the event by technology. save the date for now, and we'll have more details on that. We'll send as soon as they're available.
Great. So that's easy to remember, February 10 and March 10, right? Yeah, I think even I can remember that one. Thanks much. Does anybody have any other comments or questions, anything they want to raise before we adjourn? Okay, not hearing any. And let's see on the chat. Not really seeing any right now. Thank you, everyone, for your work in the past. Thank you for the discussion today. And thank you for the work that we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. And again, this is pretty important stuff. So thank you for the investment of your time and your expertise. And anyone want to say anything else?
I just want to thank you, Chair Snyder, for your leadership of the committee. Like you say, it's important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maren, for all that you do as well. Okay, if there's no objection, we're in adjournment and look forward to seeing everyone remotely on February the 10th, and also schedule the roundtable for March the 10th. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Good luck. Stay safe.